off it. They will continue to have a stellar record. And I'll be back on the floor when these amendments come up for a vote, and I just hope and pray that people will think about this very hard before they cast their votes. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I have 12 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and I ask unanimous consent these requests be agreed to, these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much. I note the absence of the
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Continuing with general speeches in the Senate until this afternoon, when senators are expected to return to debate on small business legislation. Votes on up to 10 amendments are expected this afternoon. Senate leadership is aiming to have a final passage vote on this bill before the end of the week. This morning, many senators were away in New York for the funeral of former New York Congresswoman and vice presidential candidate Geraldine Ferraro. She died last Saturday after battling cancer. She was 75. While this quorum call is underway, we're going to go back now to the second panel in the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee hearing on allegations that Homeland Security's political appointees are stonewalling Freedom of Information Act requests. Again, this is the second panel, and it started about 10 minutes ago.
In order to better publicize the documents that are requested by individual FOIA requesters and make them more widely available.
Okay, so a definite streamlined process should be in order.
I agree.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards, these FOIAs have had a kind of a chilling effect on, these delays have had a chilling effect on the FOIA request. I'm also from Arizona, and we've got a lot of problems with our southern border. We've got a lot of violence. How do you think this could have implicated the process, particularly of FOIA, and maybe getting proper information out to the proper authorities?
Without getting into specific FOIA cases, my team went ahead and did a review of the FOIA process. And what we found was even though in 2009 there was 103,000, and 2010 there was 130,000, 70% of that was immigration alien files. There were still a number of FOIAs that once they are completed, they could have gotten out of the door, and it still ended up in the review process. The 1.5% they're talking about the 662, which ended up in the significant review process. That also should not have been delayed. So I cannot really speak to the specific FOIA case, but this is what was our scope, and this is what we observed.
Were there potential cases involving our Border Patrol, law enforcement on our southern border that could have been implicated by such a FOIA? Do you know of such?
I don't know of such, sir.
I'll yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Ross, are you prepared? And I yield you 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Verde, I understand your organization's made a few requests in the past, and I guess over the years you've had some adequate responses and some inadequate responses. My question to you is that based on your experience, have you seen an improvement in the last year for your FOIA requests, or has it been declining or stayed the same?
Sadly, we have maintained a 100% noncompliance rate, or rather the agency has maintained a 100% noncompliance rate with EPIC's requests over the past year in terms of meeting statutory deadlines. So we have neither seen an improvement nor, I think, degradation in the response.
And these have been based on just grammatical errors, or have been substantive errors, or why have the requests not been granted in a timely fashion?
They simply have either not responded to the request, they have asserted exemptions, again, outside the statutory period, right, that we then had to challenge through the administrative process. But in any case, we did not receive documents prior to the 20 working day deadline. In many cases, the agency also violated the deadlines for processing administrative appeals, and in one circumstance, the agency missed its deadline to answer a lawsuit in which we were trying to force disclosure of documents.
So in other words, there's been absolutely no change other than maybe worse?
I have not seen a material change.
Okay. Recently, there's been, since President Obama entered into office, he's issued 3 memorandums relating to transparency and open government issues. 2 of those memorandums, one regarding the Freedom of Information Act and one regarding transparency and open government, were released on the President's first full day in office. And then Attorney General Eric Holder instructed by memorandum, the chief FOIA officer to support career staff by ensuring that they have the tools necessary to respond promptly and efficiently to FOIA requests. The President has emphasized on several occasions the need and requirement that there be an efficient and immediate response and transparency to FOIA requests. In fact, in January of 2009, he stated, "In the face of doubt, openness prevails. The government should not keep information confidential merely because public officials might be embarrassed by disclosure, because errors and failures might be revealed, or because of speculative or abstract fears. Non-disclosure should never be based on an effort to protect the personal interests of government officials at the expense of those they are supposed to serve." My question to each of you is, do you feel that the Department's front office review process comports with the President's objectives to FOIA? And Mr. Edwards, I'll start with you.
Well, as we looked through the process, particular interest came to us about the significant review process, because that had changed from the 2005 practice. So starting September 2009, there was a review and concurrence, right, which really delayed the process. We have brought this to their attention, and we have a number of recommendations, and the Department has taken efforts to put the SharePoint site in place. It was a 3-day notice, and now it's changed as of this Monday to a day. So I think the Department has made a number of changes.
Just recently?
Just recently.
Right. Mr. Verde?
I think that the basic act of flagging specific requests based on this criteria, this politically sensitive criteria, is inconsistent with the President's commitment in this area.
Okay. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Verde, I'd like you to elaborate on that. You earlier said, if I understood correctly, and I'll just paraphrase, that sending information to political appointees so that they're aware, let's just say a press office, sending them as they go out or substantially as they go out would not violate FOIA, so that essentially the press office could respond when the press, now having this information, ask questions. That part is just fine, right?
Correct.
So it's really the advanced notice and with the ability to act that really distorts the process, whether they act to spin beforehand or they act to actually change the material release. For both of you, that's where the line's crossed, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's the combination of delay, which is unlawful insofar as it violates the statutory deadlines, and the use of criteria that have been labeled irrelevant by courts and by lawmakers to make a determination concerning a FOIA request. Those are the two aspects that I believe are objectionable in this circumstance.
Thank you. I thank you, the gentleman, and I guess I'm the last, so I'll yield myself 5 minutes, and this will be the close. First of all, we're correct. We're really, for both of you, you're really dealing with 662, to use the number that apparently is the most accurate number today. Those are the ones that were subject to delay or interference, not the rest of the files, as far as we know. Is that right? As to the IG, and that's...
As far as I know, based on the committee report.
That has nothing to do with excess redacting that you may find in those process. Mr. Verde, they talked about redacting. In your experience, how often have you prevailed when you finally get through the process of what you originally got versus what you ultimately are entitled to after you object to the amount of redacting? What's the ratio? How often do you prevail?
We almost universally prevail on at least some redactions.
So there is
not necessarily on all.
Right, but there's a pervasive problem, clearly, and I think the IG would agree that if you fail, if redacting is over...
Our former National Security Advisor, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Secretary of State Colin Powell will visit the White House. And I expect that they will discuss the current mission against the Gaddafi dictatorship in Libya. When we look at this mission, I think it's important to review the wise words of General Powell in his recommendation in considering any military mission for the United States in her coming years. When we think about his advice, many times it's been called the Powell Doctrine, and it was memorialized in a 1992 article in Foreign Affairs magazine called U.S. Forces, the Challenges Ahead. This article became known very much as the Powell Doctrine, with two additions that the public and press often put on his thoughts about military missions for the United States. In short, the Powell Doctrine includes answers to a number of questions that any president, Secretary of State, or Secretary of Defense should answer prior to, or at the very least during, a military mission involving the United States. Those questions are as follows. Is the political objective we seek important, clearly defined, and understood? Next, have all other nonviolent policy means failed? Third, will military force achieve the objective? Fifth, at what cost? Next, have the gains and risks been analyzed? And finally, how might the situation that we seek to alter, once it is altered by force, develop further, and what might be the consequences? Added to this, the press and public have offered two more additions, oftenly called part of the Powell Doctrine. Can we hit the enemy with overwhelming force? And can we demonstrate the support of the American people for the mission, as shown by a vote of the United States Congress? When we look at the current Libyan mission and apply the Powell Doctrine, we see a mixed picture, one that should be fixed by a rigid application of its questions and answers to them reported back to the American people. Now, I support our mission in Libya, and I think the President's address to the nation was a good start. But I think we would serve our troops well if we proceeded to answer the Powell Doctrine questions rigidly. First, is the political objective that we seek to achieve important, clearly defined, and understood? I think the end of the Gaddafi regime is important. I think the protection of civilians from an impending massacre is also important. And I think it would be clearly understood by the American people. But in practical terms, we cannot protect, for example, the people of Benghazi unless we stop the killer. And the only way to stop him is to disarm him and remove him from power. I think that objective would be clearly understood, would be welcomed by our European and Arab allies, and would bring about the long-term protection of the civilian community by which the administration first justified this action. Secondly, have all nonviolent policy means failed? There is a 30-year record of diplomacy with regard to the Libyan dictatorship. Muammar Gaddafi has shown himself to be one of the most violent and corrupt and at times even crazy leaders from the continent of Africa. While the United States has had difficulties with him for 3 decades, while Secretary Gates has referred to the imposition of Jersey barriers here in Washington, D.C. as early as 1983, when there were reports of potential Gaddafi threats to our president, at the time President Reagan. It took several decades for the rest of the world to lose patience with Muammar Gaddafi. The decision by the United Nations and Arab League and surrounding nations not just to support resolutions in international forum, but then for some of those nations, numbering over a dozen, to take military action shows that finally the international community has broken with Muammar Gaddafi and feels that diplomacy and nonviolent means no longer can work with regard to managing him and the threat that he proposes. Will military force achieve the objective? And I think it can. But here the situation is somewhat mixed. If air power is only applied to a combat air patrol to enforce a no-fly zone, there is the potential for Libyan armor and artillery to overwhelm what is a very disorganized and ragtag civilian army that initially made gains against Gaddafi, then lost them and stood at the gates of Benghazi, then retook key communities like Ashdabia, Brega, and came to the outskirts of Sirte, then re-lost nearly all of those gains this week. When we look at how we should support the end of this dictatorship and the final protection of civilians in Libya, we should understand that the provision of close air support to take out Libyan armor and artillery is essential to this mission, and that we should develop the means to command, control, and direct this effort. I'm concerned that today I'm unsure, maybe uninformed, but unsure as to how the close air support mission is handled. Originally, when this mission was undertaken, it was falling under the command and control of standard U.S. military doctrine. Since Libya is part of the AFRICOM Combatant Command Area of Operations, this operation, as I understood it, fell under the command of the President of the United States, to the Secretary of Defense, to General Carter Ham, commander of AFRICOM. As the United States then moved to more internationalize the military effort, it sought to transfer command to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and its commander, who also happens to be an American, Admiral Stavridis, who stands not only as the commander of U.S. forces in Europe, but as Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. I understand that the administration has put forward a task force to be commanded potentially by a senior Canadian general who would command this operation. I understand that diplomacy went well with regard to the command of the anti-air operation in this endeavor. But negotiations with regard to the provision of close air support were much more difficult. Today, I'm not exactly sure who is in command of those operations. Is it General Ham at AFRICOM? Is it the Canadian general at the Joint Task Force? Is it Admiral Stavridis as the chairman of the, or as the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe? My hope is that we identify one key Allied commander who is not just in charge of combat air patrol enforcing a no-fly zone, but also close air support to ensure that the rebels are not defeated, to attrite armor and artillery from Muammar Gaddafi's army, and to eventually achieve a lasting victory, which in my mind could only mean the end of the Gaddafi dictatorship. I'm particularly concerned today about key weapon systems that are available to the United States and not to other countries, particularly the A-10 Warthog and the AC-130 gunship. These are unique assets, critical in the ability to take out Libyan tanks and artillery. If we internationalize this conflict and, as I've heard potential talk of removing combat platforms of the United States from executing close air support missions, my question is, would AC-130 gunships and A-10s be available for these missions? They are uniquely effective and would make this conflict shorter and more likely to end victoriously. And my hope is that they would continue to be provided to the Allied commander so that the progress could move forward on eventually ending this conflict. General Powell also asked that we estimate the cost of this operation. My understanding this morning is that this operation has cost roughly about $500 million and would likely entail a greater cost if it lasts for a long time. We should estimate this cost, and we should also tell the Congress how that we're going to pay for it. My understanding right now is that the administration will not seek a supplemental and will take this out of the core budget of the Department of Defense. What implications does this have for procurement, for military construction, for pay and benefits, and for other critical operations of the United States, led in order of importance the Afghan mission, the Iraq mission, and the plus dozen ships that are now providing the critical humanitarian relief and nuclear recovery of our allies in Japan. General Powell also asks us to ask the question, have the gains and risks been thoroughly analyzed? While they may not have been thoroughly analyzed, I am comfortable with the administration's answers to these questions. Had Gaddafi taken Benghazi, had he defeated the rebel government, I think he would have then moved over time to destabilize the new government in Egypt. An end to the Camp David peace accords would be a strategic reversal for the United States. It would put at jeopardy the operations of the Suez Canal. It would have increased the danger to our allies in the State of Israel. And I think that the administration was wise to see a tremendous additional risk had Gaddafi won this war. Now, at least we know that the rebels are likely not to be defeated. But a stalemate is also not in our interest. And I would hope that we would recall the advice of General Sherman, who said that we should make this as rough and as difficult as possible to the enemy, so that, ironically, in most humanitarian terms, it ends. And it ends on the terms of the United States, our allies, and the new rebel government. Powell also asked us how we might see the situation once it is altered by force to further develop, and what consequences are there. My hope is that we would quickly follow the direction of the French government and recognize the Jalil government, to see that government as a growingly potential partner for the United States and the allies, so that the people of Libya would see who their potential transitional leaders are, and so that we would have clear political authority for them. My hope is that a U.S. envoy would deal directly with the Jalil government, and that we would follow the suit of our allies, and we would make sure that then there's clear lines of authority, not just on the military side for combat air patrol and close air support, but also political direction for the potential new leaders of Libya. Added to the Powell Doctrine are the two other points often included, and that is, can we hit the enemy with overwhelming force? I strongly support the administration's limitation on no combat boots on the ground. I think that is a wise decision by the United States, and I think that we can still direct a terrific, tremendous, overwhelming, and decisive force to end this conflict as quickly as possible. My understanding is that other allied governments may not be so completely constricted on their ability to provide, especially the critical role of forward air controllers who will direct allied air power to the most effective targets to attrite and eventually eliminate the Libyan military. My hope is, though, that we bring all combat assets to bear of the United States and our allies so that we quickly eliminate, especially Gaddafi's armor and artillery force, and so that he comes to a quick end on the military battlefield. Finally, the Powell Doctrine often has included a final point, which is, can the support of the American people be demonstrated? And I think in this case, we have fallen short. While the Congress, while the Senate has adopted a resolution calling for a no-fly zone in Libya, co-sponsored by myself and the senior senator from New Jersey, or the senior to me senator from New Jersey, Senator Menendez, I think this is inadequate in fully demonstrating American people's support for what our troops are doing over Libya. I think it is clear that our mission is sustained and the critical political will of the United States is enhanced if we can formally express support for what our men and women are doing overseas. This has been done in some pretty tough conflicts in the past, particularly Afghanistan and Iraq. And for this conflict, the administration should call for a resolution of approval, and the elected representatives of the American people should vote. In general, I support the President's policy and would vote for this resolution. But I think it is essential for those who are on the field to understand that the Congress is formally with them in a vote called to cast up or down for this mission, and for all of its unintended consequences, potential upside or downside. As Colin Powell leaves the White House today, I hope he carries this advice. I hope that all of us recall the key points that he laid out. I think he has wisely put forward for past presidents and this president a key checklist that all of us as citizens, or those of us who are senators as part policymakers, can have in reviewing the Powell Doctrine. In the end, the Powell Doctrine is a key, easy checklist to use to make sure that we resist the call for military action until absolutely necessary. But once necessary, that we hit the enemy with everything that we got, that we make the conflict as short and therefore as humanitarian as possible, that we demonstrate the full support of the American people for the men and women of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and that we give them a clear mission with one allied commander. I hope the President gets this advice directly from the General today, and I hope that the President and the Senate follows it. And with that, Madam President, I yield back and would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. Alexander.
Debate and vote on small business legislation is on the Senate's agenda for this afternoon. It's been general speeches since they gavelled in this morning at 9:30. This, though, from CQ this afternoon. The Senate may vote on repeal of health care law's 1099 provision. This is by Emily Etheridge of the CQ staff. Senate leaders may allow a vote today on a standalone bill to repeal a reviled tax reporting provision in the health care law, which, if successful, would send the measure directly to the President for his signature. If the repeal bill became law, it would mark the first significant change to the health care law, and one that both parties worked on together. Leadership aides indicated that the Senate could temporarily drop the small business bill currently on the floor and take up the House-passed measure, along with the Democratic alternative to the repeal measure. An aide to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said that Democrats were working with Republicans to try to reach agreement on the repeal measure, as well as on other pending amendments.
The senator from Colorado.
Madam President, are we on a quorum call?
Correct.
I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Madam President, I'd also ask unanimous consent to address the Senate for up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'm here again to urge the Senate to free up capital for small businesses to allow them to grow, expand, and begin hiring again. Now, unfortunately, there's a burdensome federal regulation that currently limits the number of small business loans credit unions can make to family entrepreneurs. Credit unions have money to lend, and they know small businesses in their communities, and they know that these businesses desperately want to jumpstart our economy by taking out new loans to grow their companies, I should say, and hire more workers. 2 weeks ago, I came to this very floor to ask consideration of a bipartisan amendment, Senate Amendment 242, which I offered to the underlying bill to raise this cap that I've alluded to on small business loans. The amendment would simply get government out of the way and allow credit unions to increase small business lending in their communities without costing American taxpayers a dime. I want to repeat that, Madam President. It would not cost American taxpayers a single dime. Now, when I've spoken on the Senate floor previously in support of this amendment and asked for the amendment to be considered, the chair of the Small Business Committee, Senator Landrieu, objected to my request and indicated that Senator Johnston, the new chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, opposed the amendment. And I wanted to clear up some misinformation that the American people may have heard at that time, and thank Senator Landrieu for removing from the congressional record her assertion that Chairman Johnson opposed my amendment. I understand that as the new chairman of the Banking Committee, Senator Johnson has an interest in revisiting this legislation, which I negotiated with the Treasury Department, the National Credit Union Administration, and the previous chairman of the Banking Committee, Senator Chris Dodd. But I would like to make it clear in the congressional record that Chairman Johnson does not, in fact, oppose this amendment. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to clear up some confusion related to the $30 billion small business lending fund established as a part of the Small Business Jobs Act, which arose when I tried to call up my amendment 2 weeks ago. As I pointed out in my original remarks, banks were given access to the Small Business Lending Fund, but credit unions have not been allowed to expand their small business lending because of the very cap on loans my amendment addresses. In our discussion here on the Senate floor, it was pointed out to me that credit unions had been asked if they wanted to participate in the Small Business Lending Fund, but that the credit union industry had turned down that invitation. I was unaware of such an offer, and I appreciate being told of it. But I would also point out that unlike many banks, most credit unions do not need extra capital in order to make loans, which is what the Small Business Lending Fund intended to provide. Rather, like I've said, most credit unions currently have capital to lend to small businesses, but unfortunately they are being prevented from making those loans due to the arbitrary cap limiting their small business lending to no more than 12.25% of their assets. So it's no wonder that credit unions didn't have an interest in the $30 billion bank fund, because they don't need the money and couldn't use it anyway because of this burdensome cap that's put on small business loans. So, Madam President, I appreciate the opportunity here today that maybe has arisen around confusion that, regarding my amendment, Senate Amendment 242. I thank the Small Business Committee Chair and Ranking Member for their great work on the underlying bill, which is very important to my home state of Colorado. Now, I really wish my amendment would get a vote today, but regardless of what happens today, I'm going to continue to work with Chairman Landrieu, Ranking Member Snowe, and the rest of my colleagues to find innovative means to free up credit for small businesses in a responsible way. And on a final note, Madam President, you hail from a great state that has a significant banking and credit union sectors both. We know that they don't always see eye to eye, which is the root of objection to my amendment. They still manage to operate side by side to serve their community's credit needs. Well, why? Because they both make up the fabric of America, and continuing to grow our economy is simply the way we do business in the United States of America. And I'd like to highlight that spirit, which is in stark contrast to the kind of divisive politics that have been brewing in America, one that furthers disagreement, draws ideological lines in the sand, and frankly sows disrespect at the expense of shared interests and collective prosperity. And the American people are seeing a disappointing example of that today. There's a vocal minority outside this very Capitol demanding acrimony and combative approach from members of Congress, which I believe, and many of us believe in the end, will just further disable our capacity to get our economy back on its feet. Now, while this is happening outside, many of us here are inside doing the people's business. We treat each other with respect, and we're here working on a bill to help small businesses invest in R&D, and we're also negotiating a compromise to keep our government running. That's the American way I've always known, and I applaud my colleagues who remain committed to working together. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. Alexander.
The senator from Illinois.
I ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without we're in a quorum call.
Oh, I ask consent the quorum call be suspended, and then consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise today to speak about the issue of swipe fees. Now, most people don't know what a swipe fee is, but it's almost part of your daily life. The next time you reach into your wallet or purse and pull out a piece of plastic to pay for something, like my debit card here, and present it at a retailer or a restaurant or a hotel or a gas station, understand that what is happening in that transaction, there are several things that are not even visible. What is happening in that transaction is you are paying that merchant, and your bank is going to honor that payment from your account on your debit card, but then the bank and credit card company are going to charge the merchant for the transaction. Now, in days gone by, if you paid in cash, obviously there was no fee involved. If you paid with a check, which was done for a long time and is done less and less now, there were pennies charged to process the check, whether the face amount of the check was $1 or $100. Pennies to process the piece of paper through the system. Now, a much more efficient system is being used with debit cards, where you actually are withdrawing money from your own account to the credit of the restaurant or the retailer. And unfortunately, there is a fee involved charged to the merchant or retailer called the swipe fee, accurately called the swipe fee. Because what has happened is that these major companies, Visa and MasterCard, and the banks that issue their cards have established how much each transaction will pay in this swipe fee or interchange fee. And the Federal Reserve just recently did an analysis and found something interesting. They found that the average swipe fee across America is 44 cents for each transaction. Then they said, well, what does it actually cost to process this debit account movement of money from one place to another? And the answer was 10 cents or less. So there is a substantial charge involved in the hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of transactions that go on every single day. And it has a direct impact on the place you do business. It means that there is an added cost to the retailer or merchant that you're doing business with for the use of this debit card that goes beyond the actual cost to the company and the bank involved. Well, you say to yourself, well, that's business, isn't it? If you're going to take these cards and you want the convenience of using these cards, you've obviously negotiated 44 cents, and that's the way it goes. Wrong. There is no negotiation involved. The retailers and merchants literally have no bargaining power in what that fee will be. And over the years, that swipe fee or interchange fee has been creeping higher and higher. For many businesses across America, it is the second or third most expensive item in doing business. That's right. Beyond the cost of personnel and workers, and beyond the rental and utilities paid or health insurance, comes a swipe fee. The fees charged by credit and card companies for the use of debit cards and credit cards. So what we said last year while we were debating financial reform was this price fixing by the credit card companies, and there are two giants, Visa and MasterCard, that control 80% of the credit card transactions in America. This swipe fee that's being charged by them should be reasonable and proportionate to their actual cost. They shouldn't be able to force feed and price fix a swipe fee or interchange fee on retailers and merchants across America. And we said to the Federal Reserve, take a look at this and try to figure out a way to establish a reasonable, proportional fee, since the credit card companies and the big banks are not going to negotiate it. They're in the process of doing it. And we also said that any bank or credit union with less than $10 billion in assets will not be affected by this. Our object was to make sure that the hometown banks, the local credit unions could continue to charge interchange fees without any type of oversight by the federal government. Some people said, well, why didn't you include them? Well, we tried to give them an opportunity to continue to do business because I think, frankly, those that are closest in the communities are the ones that we ought to be mindful of and protective of. Perhaps I have a little prejudice involved, too. The biggest banks in America, the top 1% of banks in America, are the ones that do almost 60% of this credit card business. I'm talking about the same Wall Street banks that ended up getting a bailout from the federal government to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars. I don't have a lot of sympathy for them. They made some stupid mistakes, and the taxpayers came to their rescue. And from my point of view, we shouldn't be subsidizing them or creating an opportunity for them to fix prices when it comes to merchants and retailers across America. Well, this passed last year with a strong bipartisan vote of 64. And the biggest banks in America and the biggest credit card companies in America have been working nonstop ever since to stop this from going into effect. They have poured more resources into this effort than I've seen, and I've been around this place for a while. They want to stop this because they hate swipe fee reform like the devil hates holy water. For them, it is a dramatic loss of money. How much? Each month in America, these swipe fees generate $1.3 billion. $1.3 billion for the banks, at the expense of merchants and small businesses, and large businesses too, for that matter, across America. But not just at their expense. These swipe fees are being paid every time a person uses a debit card or a credit card to pay the government, to pay a university, to make a charitable contribution. Now, that's a reality. And $1.3 billion a month, most of it going to the biggest banks and credit card companies in America, they believe is worth fighting for. And so the fight has been joined. And senators have come to the floor and introduced an amendment to postpone this swipe fee reform for 2 years. 2 years to study it. Let me see, 24 months times $1.3 billion. Over $30 billion they want in a handout to the biggest banks and credit card companies in America. I don't think that's fair. It's sure not fair to the small businesses that have asked me to introduce this and asked me to continue to fight for it. It's not fair to these businesses or their customers. You see, our efforts are not just supported by the businesses. They're supported by the Consumer Federation of America, the largest consumer advocacy group in the United States. They understand that if you're dealing with a competitive business, let's assume you have gas stations across the street from one another, and you make more profitability at one gas station, they can lower prices and be more competitive with the gas station across the street. The same isn't true when it comes to big banks and credit cards. When it comes to credit cards, we have not a monopoly, but a duopoly, two monopolistic companies. Very little competition between them. There's a lot of competition in small-town America and Main Street America. Some people ask me why I tackle some of these issues that involve the big banks and credit card companies and others. They say, don't you understand that, you know, these operations that you're fighting are pretty large in terms of their resources and their political might. There's truth to that. The banks are a $13 trillion industry in America, according to the American Bankers Association, $13 trillion. And last year, the banking industry in America made over $87 billion in profits. Visa and MasterCard were spun off from big banks a few years ago and now are multi-billion-dollar companies that control nearly 80% of the payment card market. People tell me these financial industry giants have unlimited resources, and they're going to fight when there's $1 billion a month on the table. Well, I don't think the people of Illinois sent me or sent from their own states other senators to hand the keys of this country over to the big banks and the credit card companies. They sent me here to make sure that Wall Street banks follow the same rules of the road that Main Street businesses follow every single day. There's nothing wrong with fees charged for services provided, as long as those fees are transparent and are set in a competitive market environment. Don't tell me you're for a free market and then say, but Visa and MasterCard can fix prices. Don't tell me you're for a free market and then say those prices that they fix have to be concealed and hidden from the public. When markets are characterized by transparency, competition, and choice, consumers get a benefit. But consumers don't benefit when fees are hidden, changed without warning, or set by agreement between competitors. Sadly, that describes many of the fees that banks and card companies have charged in recent years. We passed the Credit Card Act in 2009, and then the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act last year, and the Consumer Protection Act was also included. We targeted many of the hidden fees that consumers pay in America. And if we don't do it, ladies and gentlemen, if the United States Senate doesn't do it, I would say to my colleagues, it won't be done. These powerful economic business entities in America need to be watched closely. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of those who analyze the recession which we're dealing with. Left to their own devices, they will go to extremes when it comes to profit-taking. And that's what's happening when it comes to these big banks and credit card companies today. If we don't stand up for consumers and small businesses right here on the floor in the Senate, shame on us. Who else is going to do it? By making fees transparent and helping to inform consumers, our laws will help the financial services market work better for all Americans. This swipe fee or interchange fee reform amendment that I added to the Dodd-Frank bill also addressed an anti-competitive market failure in the debit card system. For years, the banking industry has engaged in a collusive practice. The banks that issue the cards have let Visa and MasterCard fix the interchange fee rates that banks receive from merchants every time a debit card is swiped. The banks get the fees, but they don't set the fees. Their friends at Visa and MasterCard set the fees that will be charged. This is price fixing, pure and simple, by Visa and MasterCard on behalf of thousands of banks, and this price fixing is currently unregulated. Of course, every bank in the country is going to tell you that the interchange system is working just fine, Senator. That's because with centrally fixed interchange rates, banks don't have to worry about competition. Each bank knows the bank down the street is getting the same fee that they are. There are two fundamental problems with Visa and MasterCard's fixing of these interchange rates and swipe fees. First, centralized rate fixing gives the card-issuing banks no incentive to manage their operational and fraud costs efficiently. All banks in the Visa network are guaranteed the same Visa price-fixed interchange rate, whether they're efficient or not. There's no competition, and the fees literally subsidize inefficiency. Second, because Visa and MasterCard, the credit card giants, control nearly 80% of the debit card market, and merchants can't realistically refuse to accept them, Visa and MasterCard have the incentive to constantly raise interchange rates to encourage banks to issue more of their cards. So fee rates keep going up, and the merchants are helpless to do anything about it. I have heard so many speeches on the floor of the United States Senate here about our love for small business, and we should. It is the backbone of the economy of America. This interchange fee goes to the basic survival of small business across America. And if this Senate is going to decide that it's more important to protect the big banks and credit card companies than small business, shame on us. And we should accept the reality that it means that these small businesses will struggle, will not be as profitable, will not hire as many people. Can that make us a better country? Can that help us out of the recession? Merchants can't say no to Visa and MasterCard because of the market power of these two credit card giants, and because swipe fees are fixed by the networks. A merchant doesn't even have the option of negotiating a better deal. So merchants are stuck with ever-increasing swipe fees passed along to consumers in the cost of gasoline and groceries. Consumers, particularly low-income and unbanked consumers, pay for the debit interchange system to the tune of $16 billion a year. Incidentally, do you know what the interchange fee is in Canada, charged by Visa and MasterCard? Same fee I've been talking about here through the banks in Canada? Zero. There's no interchange fee. Do you know what it is in Europe? A fraction of what it is in the United States. Now, why is that the case? Why would these credit card giants say that they can't survive oversight of their interchange fees in the United States and charge zero in Canada and pennies in Europe? Because the Canadian government came to them and said, we are not going to let you rip off our small businesses. We will regulate you. They said, never mind, we won't charge an interchange fee in Canada. In Europe, the same thing happened. Now, if we are silent, exactly the opposite will occur. The credit card companies will continue to increase these fees at the expense of Americans, consumers, and small businesses and large businesses alike. Some people out there apparently trust Visa and MasterCard to price fix in a fair and benevolent way. They don't see the need for reform. Well, if you believe that the giant credit card networks can be trusted to fix interchange prices in a way that's fair for banks, merchants, and consumers, then you should be fine with the status quo and have no problem prolonging it for years. That is exactly what the amendment coming before us will do. It will postpone for 2 years and put into a study this issue. Well, we should study things before we act on them. That's for sure. But let's look at the record. We've had 9 different congressional hearings on this issue and 3 separate studies already. We've studied this one to death. What the banks and credit card companies want us to do is to keep on studying so that they can collect $1.3 billion every single month. That's what their strategy is. I don't place my trust in Visa and MasterCard, and I'm not alone. Last year, a strong bipartisan majority in Congress said we better stand up for small business and retailers and consumers. And we passed this law. And now the banks and credit card companies are pulling out all the stops. I learned yesterday that Chase, which is one of the major issuers of these debit cards across America, sent a letter to their customers in a number of states and said, you know, if you don't repeal the Durbin Amendment, we're going to end up in a position where we won't be able to give you all of the rewards which we're offering you on your debit and credit card. Well, first, this just relates to debit cards, which don't carry the big reward programs. And secondly, this kind of veiled threat from these credit card companies should not be taken seriously by any consumer across America. The last time we had credit card reform, we unfortunately waited months before it became law. The credit card companies saw it coming. So what did? They dramatically raised their interest rates on consumers across America in that period of time. Don't expect any favors from this industry. If we do not regulate the credit card industry and the banks that issue these cards, trust me, the consumers will continue to lose time and time again. And as for Chase, I don't think there are going to be any poppy flowers sold on their behalf on the street corners. If I remember correctly, in their last earnings report, they had a 48% increase in profits over their previous year. They're doing quite well. And now it's time for them to give small businesses and consumers across America a break when it comes to the fees that they're charging. Congress said that if banks are going to let Visa and MasterCard fix the interchange rate that merchants pay banks, then the rates fixed on behalf of the biggest 1% of the banks must be reasonable and proportional. Reasonable and proportional. That's a narrowly targeted reform through the Federal Reserve. The new law will provide a constraint on ever-rising interchange fees that the current broken market does not provide. We've given this job to the Federal Reserve. They put out draft rulemaking. They're soliciting comments from across the country. Chairman Bernanke called me a couple days ago and said they needed an additional few weeks to come up with the rule that will still go into effect in July of this year. I understand it. I want him to do his best. I want him to follow what this law says, exempting credit unions and community banks with less than $10 billion in assets. The Fed's taking this job seriously. I'm glad they are. The Fed knows that many small banks are concerned that the reform might affect them, even though the law clearly exempts them. Last week, Chairman Bernanke told all those small banks in a meeting here in Washington he understands their concern and will work with them to make sure the final rules address them. I urge my colleagues to support the reasonable reform that Congress passed last year. We don't need another study. A study is an excuse for a delay, an excuse for credit card companies and the biggest banks in America to take $1.3 billion a month out of the economy and away from small businesses. I want my colleagues to know there's a broad support for debit interchange reform. I've received many letters in recent days from individuals, small businesses, and organizations that support reform. Now, I will readily concede that the big box retailers are also benefited by this. I'm not trying to hide that. That's a fact. But the simple fact of the matter is this has been generated by a lot of local people and a lot of local businesses. And let me tell you, this is hardball as far as the big banks and credit card companies are concerned. I happen to mention that I was brought to this issue 4 or 5 years ago by a good friend of mine, a very conservative gentleman who's been very successful in downstate Illinois named Rich Neiman of Quincy, Illinois. Rich owns a bunch of grocery stores. He's expanded them all across the Midwest. A harder working guy you would just never, ever find. He and I disagree on a lot of political issues, but I always turn to him when I have a business issue because I know he's going to give me an honest analysis. And Rich told me that when he started accepting plastic at his grocery stores, it went from just a small number of transactions to now almost half the transactions at his grocery stores are with plastic. And he says, they're killing me with this interchange fee. The credit card companies and debit card companies are charging him these fees, and he has no voice or bargain in the process. They charge whatever they want to charge, and he pays it. As a man who's trying to create jobs in small-town America, I thought he had the right approach to this. They should be able to recover their reasonable proportional cost for using a debit card, but why should they be allowed to penalize a business like Rich Neiman's grocery stores? Well, I said this publicly a couple days ago, and not surprisingly, some folks on the other side decided to go after and attack Rich Neiman as a businessman. Well, I'm going to stand with him. From my point of view, he's a good man. I don't think he votes for a lot of Democrats. I hope once in a while he might vote for me. But notwithstanding that, I respect him so much. And I'm sorry that he had to take this beating in the press from the other side. He can take it, though. He's been a tough guy who stood up for his family and his business all his life. Incidentally, on March 18th, I received a letter from the American Council on Education, Mr. President, and 9 other national associations representing colleges and universities. Here's what they said. Debit card swipe fees have been a hidden expense for students and families paying for college for which they receive no benefit. As a result of the law enacted last year and the Federal Reserve's proposed rule, we believe colleges and universities will see reduced debit card costs, which they'll be able to pass on to students through lower cost, as well as increased resources for institutional grant aid and student services. You don't think about it. You think about gas stations, but the fact is students use plastic for everything. And the universities and colleges end up paying these swipe fees to the big banks and the credit card companies and debit card companies as a result. March 15th, I got a letter from the Consumer Federation of America. Some of the folks on the other side said this will never help consumers. These businesses are going to take all the savings that would otherwise go to the big banks and credit card companies, and they're going to just take those and go home. Well, I disagree, and so does the Consumer Federation of America, the leading consumer advocates in this country. Here's what they said on March 15th. The current interchange system is uncompetitive, non-transparent, and harmful to consumers. CFA does not support delaying implementation of the new law, which is what the amendment coming to the floor today suggests. March 15th, I received a letter from the consumer group Public Citizen and U.S. PIRG, and here's what they said. The Durbin Amendment was designed to curb anti-competitive practices in the payment card market. We do not support legislation calling for delay of the Durbin Swipe Fee Amendment. Yesterday, I received a letter from Americans for Financial Reform, a coalition of over 250 national, state, and local groups, including consumer, civil rights, investor, retiree, labor, religious, and business groups. Mr. President, here's what they said. From a consumer point of view, the current interchange system is not defensible. Feeble competition in the payment card marketplace has led to unjustifiably high debit interchange fees that the poorest Americans, generally cash customers, are required to subsidize at the store and at the gas pump. We oppose efforts to delay implementation of the Durbin Amendment through congressional action. End of quote. And make no mistake, they want to stop this rule before it's issued because they're afraid that once it's issued and once people realize the savings to business and consumers across America, they'll never go back. So they are pouring it on to try to move this amendment as quickly as possible to stop the Federal Reserve from issuing the rule which the law requires them to issue. On March 17th, the Hispanic Institute sent me a letter, and here's what they said. 16 countries and the European Union regulate swipe fees, and their experience demonstrates that regulation benefits consumers in lower fees and lower costs of goods. There is no evidence, underline no evidence, that swipe fee regulation will lead to an increase in other consumer fees. The National Small Business Association, as I said, we spend more time on the Senate floor venerating small businesses than almost anything other than our troops. Here's what the National Small Business Association said in a statement on March 23rd. The Durbin Amendment and the proposed Fed rule are beneficial to America's small businesses. Further delay, equivocation, and another big bank handout or not. I also received a letter excuse me, from 185 national and state merchant trade associations representing 2.7 million stores and 50 million employees. Let me say at the outset, the coalition I'm representing is not nearly as powerful or as large politically as the big banks and the credit card companies. We can't match them in terms of their political power, the number of lobbyists they hire, the number of letters they send, and all the rest. For the most part, they represent a lot of small businesses who are trying their best to get fair treatment. Here's what they said. We have repeatedly sought to negotiate with the card companies to reform this broken market and bring savings to our customers. 15 years later, we have concluded that normal market forces cannot and do not work in a broken market with price fixing among banks controlled by a duopoly, meaning Visa and MasterCard. They urge Congress to oppose any efforts to delay swipe fee reform. The United Food and Commercial Workers, a union which I used to belong to when I was growing up, here's what they wrote and said. Delaying swipe fee reform will also delay the creation of thousands of jobs each year that would result from reduced interchange fees. This reform is long overdue for working Americans everywhere. The National Community Pharmacists Association, a national association of chain drugstores, sent me a letter and said, we request any assistance you can provide in ensuring the timely completion of the final regulations and enforcement of the Durbin Amendment. And the National Association of College Stores and 20 state associations wrote and said, credit and debit purchases account for more than $100 million annually in interchange fees paid by college bookstores and their student and parent customers. Let me repeat, Mr. President, $100 million a year paid by college bookstores and their student and parent customers in interchange fees to the banks and credit card companies. And they go on to say, excessive swipe fees that would otherwise be returned to students through lower prices, grants, and student services are being misdirected toward credit card companies and large banks. Every month of delay means higher costs for students and parents at a time when schools are being asked to do more with less funding. I'd like to ask unanimous consent these letters be included in the congressional record at this point.
Without objection.
Mr. President,